I've always been a very sensitive person, a very people-oriented individual. I've always cared about how other people feel. That sense of wanting to make other people feel part of the group and not be embarrassed is something that has been very consistent. I was very into music growing up. I was also into sports. I played Little League, but I think I was very much shaped by my parents. My parents, the most down-to-earth, loving people. My dad was a Holocaust survivor, and he never was bitter, and he was the kind of person who everybody loved. I got interested in the brain in college. The brain is so interesting. I always felt that I connected to people, so I thought medicine was sort of something that was always drawing me. I always felt very proud that I went into medicine and that we have such meaning and such fulfillments.
Welcome back, and today I have a very special guest, Dr. Howard Weiner. He's the Chief of Neurosurgery and the Endowed Chair of Neurosurgery at Texas Children's Hospital. He's a professor and vice chair of neurosurgery at Baylor College of Medicine. And I'm telling you that stuff sounds impressive, and it is. But what's equally special about Howard is who he is as a human being. I trained with him. I got to spend 6 months on the pediatric neurosurgery rotation with him. And I am telling you, he was like visiting an island oasis in the middle of rough seas. He's loved by others, myself included. And he doesn't just manage patients' illnesses, he makes people feel cared for. And he's found a way to keep a balance in his life that nourishes him and sustains him. And those are some of the things we're here to talk about today. So Howard, thank you so much for joining us.
Such a thrill to be with you, Andrew. Thank you so much. And amazing to see how your career has flourished and really grown in the time that we've not been together. And I remember that rotation well. And I'm glad that you felt that we were an oasis. I've heard that from other people as well. I was just visiting somebody in Phoenix who was visiting as a medical student and felt the same way. And that's what we try to do. We try to lead by example and try to inspire people to really be elevated and to try to pursue what they really meant to pursue.
Yeah, and that's a big part of what makes you special and the impact you've had on me. And so some of the things we want to chat about. But I wanted to lead off with this question. Before we get into neurosurgery, hospitality, spirituality, all that stuff, who were you before medicine, and what kind of shaped you into the person who is able to do the kind of work you do with neurosurgery and especially with pediatric neurosurgery?
It's a great question. I think that I've always been the same person. I've always been a very sensitive person, a very people-oriented individual. I've always cared about how other people feel. I remember, I tell this story a lot. For some reason, I remember so well when I was a little kid in first grade, there was a boy in our class who was a congenital heart patient. And he was clearly different than the rest of us. He was smaller, skinnier. He had a big scar on his chest. He couldn't eat the snacks that we liked, and he couldn't play the sports that we liked to play. And I just felt really bad for this kid. And I think that that sense of wanting to make other people feel part of the group and not be embarrassed is something that has been very consistent. But I had a very typical childhood. I don't think I was headed to be a neurosurgeon. I was much more interested in rock and roll and music and being a rock star, quite honestly. In fact, in college, I played bass guitar for this new wave dance band called the Control Boys, and that was like the highlight of my life. We played in every fraternity every single weekend, and we played in clubs downtown in Philadelphia. And so I was very into music growing up. I was also into sports. I played Little League, but I think I was very much shaped by my parents. My parents, the most down-to-earth, loving people, kind, warm, down-to-earth. My dad was a Holocaust survivor. He survived Auschwitz. His parents were murdered there, and he was liberated from a concentration camp called Buchenwald after surviving the Death March in the winter of 1945. And, my dad loved people, and he never was bitter. And he was the kind of person who everybody loved. And that was a real example for me. My mom also grew up in Brooklyn, classmate of Barbara Streisand. Actually, my mom says Barbara was her classmate. And my mom, my parents were in the clothing business. My mom, the most warm, wonderful mother, host, cook. I used to bring all of her leftovers to Cornell Med, and everybody would devour my mother's food in the dorm. And we used to have people over to the house because we lived in Westchester at the time. And just a warm home. I have one sister who now lives in Connecticut and is a mom and community person. And yeah, just a very down to earth, warm life. We didn't have a lot of money. I went to all the best schools. I went to a very excellent private school in New York called the Ramaz School, which was in Manhattan, which was a transformative experience for me. Growing up in Westchester and sort of going to high school in Manhattan in the late 70s and sort of seeing that as a young Jewish person, I could be all these things at once. We had amazing faculty, great learning. We had our art class at the Whitney Museum around the corner. We played sports in Central Park and at the 92nd Street Y. And we read all the great works. I mean, a lot of our courses were like being in college. And that was a really, and the fact that I could do all that and go to a good college and be a very proud Jew, those were very important things to me. And I learned a lot. So I think the combination of sort of the warm, nurturing environment I grew up in and sort of thinking big, my parents, I was the first person in my family to go to college, actually graduate college. My mom went to Brooklyn for 2 years and then had me and then didn't finish. But my parents were brilliant. They never went to college. So I was their first child to go to college, and they had big dreams for me. And so it was a combination of all those things. And I had great friends. And my oldest friend in the world, I met when I was 5 years old, my friend Chuck Rosenzweig, and he's still my dearest and oldest friend. We see each other and talk every week. And so that was who I was before I thought about medicine. And I got interested in the brain in college. When I took intro psych, we had an amazing professor who wrote the textbook. And I was like, wow, this is experimental psychology. The brain is so interesting. And I started getting very interested in that. I tried on a lot of different careers. My parents were friends with all kinds of people, law partners, people who worked in the finance world. I worked on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in the summer of '82. I worked as a waiter in multiple restaurants and in the Catskills, the Borscht Belt. I worked in a law firm for many summers, and I volunteered in White Plains Hospital in the emergency room. And I always felt that I connected to people, so I thought medicine was sort of something that was always drawing me, it was always pulling me. And, Wall Street was sort of taking off in the early 80s when I was in college. And my roommate actually transferred from the college into Wharton. And that was sort of the trend, but I kind of resisted that trend. I quit my job on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange and went to go work in a research lab at Albert Einstein. And to that day, the person who hired me on Wall Street, he laughed a lot because he said that at this point in my life, if I had stuck with that career, I'd probably be retired. I always felt very proud that I went into medicine and that we have such meaning and such fulfillment. So that's sort of my childhood. And I sort of stumbled into neurosurgery.
Wow. Yeah, that's beautiful. And there's so many follow-up questions I want to ask about that. But let's start with this one because, you, as you mentioned, you really are a people person. And it almost feels like some surgeons go into surgery because they like the technical aspect. They don't love people quite as much and talking to people. It's pretty quiet in the operating room usually. And, you give this great talk about hospitality and medicine and neurosurgery, inspired by, the restaurateur Danny Meyer. And so I wanted to ask you more about that, kind of what first resonated with you about, hospitality and what inspired you to kind of to blend those two ideas together.
I could talk about this all day, but I feel that, Danny Meyer, who, if he only knew that I have given out several hundred copies of his book to students and fellowship applicants and to anyone who comes into my office, he said famously, business like life is all about how you make people feel. It's that simple and it's that hard. And I truly believe that. When I left NYU, so I was a resident and then a faculty member at NYU. I was there in New York City with you for 27 years total for that whole period of time. And when I left, it was quite emotional. They threw me a nice party. The dean and CEO, Bob Grossman, came, and our chair, John Golfinos, who's a good friend, he made a really nice party. I noticed that a lot of the goodbye notes that I got from patients and from colleagues, but mostly from patients, all had a similar sort of structure. They said, "Thank you, Dr. Weiner, for taking care of my child's hydrocephalus, for curing their brain tumor, taking out their brain tumor, helping their epilepsy. Thank you for doing this one specific technical thing, but thank you even more for being kind, warm, down to earth, for not talking down to me, for calling me on the weekends when you should have been with your children, for being a mensch." And that realization that how I made my patients feel was what they remembered. Obviously, they had to trust me to do a good, perfect technical job. I mean, the joke at NYU, my dear friend and colleague Jerry Lax, the anesthesiologist, would laugh when he'd say, "What does Dr. Weiner say in the OR? It's got to be perfect." And yes, it does have to be perfect. And as surgeons, that's what patients have to trust us to do, literally a perfect job. But I think what really makes me tick, and I think what really sets people apart and what makes you the patient's favorite, what they really remember, is that. And I think this idea that the technical part of what we do is critical, but that the human side of what we do and how we make our patients feel and how we make each other feel is slightly more important, as Danny says, I think is really the notion of hospitality. That's the thesis. And for me, this has been borne out in so many areas. I really started thinking about this a few years ago when they asked me here at Texas Children's Hospital to give a talk about building or developing an academic neurosurgical practice. And I was like, wow, I can't really talk expertly about that topic, but I can talk about my own experience. And, I've been blessed. Probably the majority of my epilepsy surgery patients, which is really the focus of my practice, brain tumors and epilepsy, most of my patients come from outside of the state and they travel from all over the place. And I started thinking about that. And why is that? Like, why do patients get on an airplane at great cost and great inconvenience, and they travel for care when they have many other centers along the way that have excellent surgeons, the same advanced technology, great nursing, great everything? I think there's something more to it. And so my sense is that, if you really want to rise to the top and build a practice like that, you really need both. And I think that, we're not saying that we want to be nice, but sort of mediocre surgeons. That's not what we're saying at all. We're saying that you want to be an outstanding neurosurgeon, but even more than that, you want to be a good human being that is going to be a shining example for people. And, that's how I hire, faculty and colleagues. I want to have people who are going to have, what Danny Meyer calls these Shake Shack HQ hospitality quotient characteristics. They have to have optimistic warmth, empathy, an insatiable appetite for learning more and advancing the field. They have to have integrity, all the things that you would want in a colleague. I think it also applies to other areas, like we unfortunately deal with complications, right? So, as much as we try to pursue perfection, complications unfortunately do happen. And I think, preventing infections is a very technical thing, but managing complications, infections, et cetera, dealing with families is really a human issue, and how you deal with people. Some of my early patients in tuberous sclerosis, when I was just starting out, my first patient had a bad complication, and yet the family went on to become big advocates of my career. And to this day, we're still in touch. So I think managing complications. Also, my career here at Texas Children's, I moved here at the age of 52 about 10 years ago, and I was not necessarily the chosen candidate from the inside. I was recruited by the chair of neurosurgery, and I was recruited by the hospital leadership, but the neurosurgery group that I lead now had their own candidate that they wanted. And so, how do you get buy-in in that situation? I think most of my colleagues now would say they're very, very happy and they don't want me to leave. But, you know, I think it's all about how you make people feel. I came in and I put this poster on the wall called by this British artist, Anthony Burrell, and it says, work hard and be nice to people. It's a beautiful block letter piece of art. And, you know, it sort of set the tone for, you know, how we roll here. So I think building a team, overcoming this kind of complicated situation where you're trying to get legitimacy from a team that doesn't really know you. I think it's all about how you treat people. So I think it's a general philosophy of life, you know, so that it's very easy for me to apply it because it's something that I really, really believe in.
Yeah, that's a hard situation to walk into, certainly, and to turn that around is impressive. I was going to ask you, you know, can you teach people this? Your trainees, your fellows, can you teach this hospitality spirit? Do you think, or do you think people just sort of either have it? You know, like you said, you were this kind of person since you were a kid. They just sort of have it, or they don't.
It's a great question, and I actually get asked this all the time, and I think it's a combination. I think many people like this, and you know, you may agree, are built like this. You know, we see certain people, leaders in our field, in other industries, who sort of have this natural talent. And those are the people that I gravitate towards and I look up to. I mean, we trained in an environment that was, you know, rough and tough. And our leaders that trained us had their own version of hospitality. They always had our back, but it wasn't necessarily in a warm and fuzzy, embracing type of way. But they still made us feel that they were on our side. But I think things have changed a bit. And I think the people that certainly I've gravitated towards have this innate ability to make people feel supported and feel a certain way. I think, you know, we can modify behavior and we can create, you know, sort of guardrails. For me, it's all about leading by example. And, you know, that piece of art that sits on the wall, work hard and be nice to people. By the way, I ordered 2 every spring from Anthony's wife, Emma Burrell. And she mailed, they're not cheap, and they're original art. And I give one out to the fellow who graduates our program. And I give one out to somebody in hospital leadership, and everybody frames it and puts it up. If you see all like the last 11-year fellows, they all have them framed in their offices. And so I think to live up to that example is life's work. It's not easy. It's much easier to snap at somebody, to write that, you know, nasty email, to, you know, to really come down hard on somebody. But I think that the better approach, and, you know, once again, there are bad actors in the world. Obviously, we need situations where we can't be nice, where we have to be more, you know, stern, and we can do it in a certain respectful way. But I think that it really sets the tone, and you have to really lead by example, which is a lot of work. You have to really be intentional about this, and I think you end up being a better person. You elevate yourself above your lower self, and I think ultimately that's the purpose of life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, you said lead by example, which I think you definitely do. But you touched on a couple other things that I've always thought are very important about leadership, you know, which I think you probably just do subconsciously, which is this sense that, you know, the leader cares about other people and will put them first. And the sense that, you know, the leader has your back and is kind of, you know, looking out for you, because that allows people to feel safe and they don't have to feel guarded and defensive and worried about, you know, something happening behind their back. And I feel like that just relaxes the whole culture and opens everything up with trust. And I'm sure that that's the environment that you foster.
100%, I think, and it comes in so many different ways. And ultimately, it comes down to being a giver. Like, in other words, taking a job like this, and once again, I'm just chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Texas Children's. It's not like I lead a huge team. We have, you know, 10 neurosurgeons altogether. But I think that, you know, the clear thing for me is that this is not about me. It's about getting out of the way, supporting everybody on the team, understanding their why, like what makes them tick, and letting them do it and facilitating it, and then going to bat for them. And by doing that, they really recognize who you are as a person. And I think that, as you described, that sort of feeling of belonging and that feeling of security that is in the air, I think creates a really nice collegial atmosphere where everyone cares about everybody. And I read this about, what they say about Popovich. I'm a big basketball fan, and I really try to do this. Like, you give people on the team a sense that you're an important part of this team. You belong on this team. We care about you. You're an important part of the team. What we do is hard, but we have great expectations for you to succeed. We know you can do it, so, think big, go big or go home, and we're going to support you to do that. And, neurosurgery is a calling. We try to really set that tone. I think that when people sense, and I think they do here, that neurosurgery is more than a job, it's more than a career, it's really a calling. And that's really why we have less burnout. But I think neurosurgery is a calling, but there's more to life than neurosurgery. That's another part of the example we try to set. But neurosurgery and the life that we have as neurosurgeons is one that should be celebrated. It's a joyous life that we don't have to make any compromises at all. I mean, at various points of the week, at various points of the day, at various points of our careers, we're making sacrifices. We're raising young children. We're training. We're learning new things. We're on call. We make sacrifices. But in totality, we should be able to have a very fulfilling, balanced life. And we get to help people. And that ability to help people is something that lives on forever. It's something that our colleagues in other fields don't have. And we really need to lean into that. And we're so fortunate to have that. So these are all things that, are not conveyed verbally, but they're conveyed in many actions, over the course of time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we forget sometimes how fortunate we are to come home at the end of the day feeling like, baked into our job is the difference that we're making in people's lives in a meaningful way. And that's special. So I wanted to ask you, you neurosurgery is a calling. I agree. And you're, the chair of a department and with a ton of responsibilities, but you're also a husband. You have 3 kids. You have a wife, you have a grandchild. So how were you able to kind of build this remarkable career, avoid burnout, and still be, dad, husband, grandpa, hopefully take care of yourself a little bit, all of these things?
Yeah. And I think it's a great question. I think now I have the ability to reflect and look back and sort of see the storyline of my life to some extent. Certainly when you're starting out and you're trying to be all things to all people and do it all, it's very daunting and it's very challenging, and there are definitely stresses. I think the first thing for me is, being with a person, a partner, a wife who is 100% in and knows me as a person, and I know her. And, Barbara, we met, when I was a medical student, and she was with me throughout residency and training. And a healthy relationship is one where you're just giving. You're just focused on how can I give to this person more and more and more. Once again, it's very simple. If I were just focused on what my needs were and what is owed to me, and like I'm not getting what I need, it's just a formula for disaster. So I try to always have that mindset. And once again, it's also a lot of work, as you know. It's a lot of work, but I think having that safety and security and love from somebody who is all in and supportive is really the key foundation. In the end, your family and friends are the ones who are going to be with you. I think, sadly, what I've seen throughout my career as a neurosurgeon is the day you walk out the door of the hospital when you're done is the day they forget your name, pretty much. I've seen that so many times. That's an extreme example. They don't necessarily forget your name, but you become less important in the eyes of people. And so that's why I think it's important to me to have a balanced life and to really cultivate the other areas of my life that are important. So, obviously my family's key. I mean, our children are sort of, the crown jewels of what we've created in the world. They're all 3 wonderful, wonderful human beings. We have 29-year-old twins. Our daughter is married and has a new baby daughter. We love our son-in-law. My son, Noah, is now in business school. He's a first-year MBA student. He was a theater major and worked in Los Angeles for a number of years in production, and he has just moved back to New York. And my younger son, Leo, is a software engineer, and just wonderful. These kids are just their character. I'm just so happy with how they've developed and into wonderful young adults. And yeah, so I have a lot to be thankful for. And most especially, we have a new granddaughter who's about 5 months old today. And so that's the center of my life. And some of the biggest compliments I've gotten from my partners are that, it's great to see that you can be a neurosurgeon, who makes some impact in the world and be a great family man. And
Yeah, not easy to do.
it's, I guess it was thought that it was an either or when we were training. But I think a lot of the people that we worked with were also very into family, and I think set an example for me. And so, that I think is a wonderful thing. When I turned 50, I kind of came to a realization that, okay, this is who I am as a person. I like this. I don't like that. I'm like this. I'm not like that. And I became very comfortable with who I was. And I've kind of leaned into the things that I love. I love music. I love running. My wife got me a trainer when I turned 60, and I'm obsessed with that now. Jason, 3 days a week, 5:15 in the morning and 6 p.m. one day. And it's just, I'm very, very involved in our synagogue. I love studying classical Jewish texts and philosophy and mysticism and classical texts. And I do that every single day in the morning and the evening. And that gives me tremendous joy. Probably the single most thing that I would say maybe saved my life as a neurosurgeon where I didn't burn out was becoming a Sabbath observer, which, is very simply taking a day off from creating in the world and just being. So I've one day, I take call, and I obviously care for patients on that day when I am on call, or when I have postoperative patients in the hospital. Everything falls away for the sake of the patients. But in general, the Sabbath is such a gift. It's a day when we take a time out from all the craziness of the world and our phones and our computers and all, electronics and all the things that we get busy with that in the end don't really matter so much. And we focus on the things that do matter: family, friends, what is the purpose of life, thinking about the important things in life. And that has really changed my life and really given me a sense of energy, and I can come back to the week as a new person. My team feels it and my patients feel it, and I'm a better neurosurgeon because of it. If only, the whole world could discover the power and the beauty of that concept, I think it would be a better world.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I when you first told me about that, I was extremely jealous because we are so plugged in all the time. And I don't think somebody has to be necessarily a Sabbath observer or even Jewish, to benefit from this, kind of idea. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about, how you spend that time, and how, if somebody wanted to, even just for a few hours, kind of unplug this way, how would somebody do that, and what do you do, and what does it do for you?
I mean, so, once again, and I totally agree. I mean, my concept of spirituality, and I don't preach religion. I don't talk about religion. I don't do anything religiously with my patients or in my practice. I don't pray with patients. I try to let people know that I stand for something more than just my individual self, as Pat Kelly said. But, in the Jewish religion, there are certain guidelines and things that are restricted on the Sabbath based on sort of biblical formulae. And they involve very practical things. We don't drive in cars. We don't cook. We don't write. We don't carry. We don't use electronics. We don't build. We don't do the concept is you're not doing anything creative, any creative acts in the world, which is what we're tasked to do every other of the 6 days of the week. And on the Sabbath day, God rested, so we rest. It's just an amazing day. Like, initially on the surface, you might think, wow, I can't use my phone. I can't watch TV. I can't watch that, Knicks game. I can't watch that Rockets game. I can't. And what you realize once you do it is that it's quite the opposite. It's the most liberating and freeing of days. By not doing these things, you enter a zone where your mind is free. I get my best creative ideas in the middle of the night on Friday night. I get up and I think about all these things. And so the typical day, like this evening, today's Friday. So this evening, my wife, she's unbelievable host. We're having 17 people for dinner. including some important leaders in the hospital and in the community and dear friends. And we usually have a lavish, delicious meal with wine and song and all kinds of conversation, and people linger. And then the next day I'll usually get up early. We have two French bulldogs. We'll walk the dogs and we'll have coffee, and then I'll go to synagogue for a few hours in the morning. And then I'll usually have a little we call a l'chaim, a little something to drink with a friend, and a little bite to eat. And then we'll have some lunch, another lavish spread. And you see why I exercise all week. And then and then the day is spent studying, learning, reading, being with friends, just being. And it's just amazing to me how much, sort of soulful nourishment and psychological nourishment you get from this day. And I really mean it. I think, that one of our famous writers said, I think his name was Ahad Ha'am, he said that, more than the Jews keep the Sabbath, which is the term we use, Sabbath keeper, more than Jews keep the Sabbath keeps the Jews. And it's something that has really been really important to me, and it's helped me gain perspective. So, by Saturday night, it's over, and then we have, the rest of the weekend. But I have a tinge of sadness on Saturday night when the stars come out and it's over, and it's like I got to turn my phone on and I got to deal with all the things that I deal with. And I come back stronger, and I come back, energized. So that's it in a nutshell. Not to get into any religious preaching, which is not what I'm doing. It's just something that has really helped me as a human being be the best version of myself that I can be.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. Honestly, the whole time you were talking about that, I was just thinking that sounds so appealing, not just for me, but for my kids who are obsessed with screens like everybody else's kids, just for all of us, because there's never really a pause. I don't spend a lot of time just being anymore.
And our kids love it. And, and I think it was a big part of their life growing up. And, neither my wife and I grew up with that as a strict, we had versions of it, but the way we do it, we didn't grow up that way. And I think that Barbara certainly loves this aspect of, really rich and deep friendships. My wife is, aside from being a brilliant docent and, art person, and she reads novels and works out like a fiend, but she's a mahjong fanatic, and she has a big mahjong game on Saturday afternoon with her friends. And that's part of the enjoyment of the day, just being with friends and letting the worries of the world can wait. And we're supposed to feel that, all the work is done, and we'll get to it when we get to it.
Oh, I love that so much. If we can just segue from that into, I wanted to ask a little bit just about burnout, in medicine, because there's so many doctors and surgeons, I think, who are struggling with that. And you seem like someone who is legitimately, fulfilled, not, but from work, from outside of work. If you had to kind of tell people, trainees, whoever, about planning for the long term in medicine, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, I think the first thing is to acknowledge that we all hit a wall at some point where we're so fatigued, stressed, overworked. It happens to everybody. It happens to me, where you just hit a wall where you just have to say, I'm at my limit. And that happens to everybody. And there are various points where it does happen. So to think that, we're immune by some formula to the stresses of the world is just not possible. Having said that, I've read some interesting studies, which are really interesting. And, I serve on the wellness committee of the American Society of Pediatric Neurosurgery and the ASPN. And I'm very interested in this topic and try to have a balanced life and teach people about that. But some of these studies that I've read have looked at wellness programs in the corporate world, big studies of tens of thousands of workers. What they have found is that, these things like, meditation and all the other things that are part of a wellness program are tools, but that in a significant way, they don't really alter the rate of burnout. What alters the rate of burnout is ways that you can be a giver. So volunteering and being involved in charitable work has the most potential benefit in the studies that I've read in terms of altering or reducing burnout. And I've also read that to the extent that one believes that their career is a calling, that's inversely related to the rate of burnout. So I think all these ideas are tied together. I think that for me, what I've done, and it's really interesting. I've just started doing this in the last year or so. I did it before, but then I realized that I'm doing something really magical for me. When I see a patient in the clinic a year after surgery and things are going well, hopefully, and everyone's happy, I'll ask the parent, "Can we take a picture?" And I'll sit with the child and I'll have the parents take a picture and I'll have them email it to me. And usually it comes with um, a beautiful note of some sort. And I still hear from the majority of my patients from my career in New York from 25, 30 years ago. They reach out to me for all kinds of reasons. They want to say hello. They've started a new business. Should I take the COVID shot? Can you look at this new MRI? But this thing and I'll tell you about a beautiful story that I experienced from last summer. But these pictures are just precious because the parents will send them to me, and just the expression on the child's face, I look at that and I'm like, there's, just you can't put words to it. And then, but even more importantly, I talk about how I try to make the patient feel, but I look at the expression on my face when I'm with the child. And that's really the secret. To me, that's the secret. Why don't I have burnout? Like when I can take a picture with this child and I see that I've impacted their life in a positive way. They're no longer having epilepsy. They can learn, they can socialize, they can make friends, they can do the things that the other kids can do. You can't put a price tag on that. And so,
Yeah.
I feel like those kind of things reduce my rate of burnout. And I think that if people would just lean into that part of their career and realize the power that we have, burnout would be reduced. I'll tell you one quick story. Last summer, one of my patients from New York, who I took care of probably 15 years ago when she was maybe 10 or 11, she reached out to me suddenly. And I'd been in touch with her over the years. She had a tumor in her brain and epilepsy, and we did surgery and it went well. And then I heard from her again when she was getting married. She was from an Orthodox Jewish world in New Jersey and was kind of out of the box, unconventional. She had flaming red curly hair and she played guitar, and it was kind of really interesting. And we bonded over our interest in music. And she reached out to me last summer by email. I don't know how she got my email address. She looked me up and she said, "Are you coming back to New York?" And I said, "Yeah, I usually come back in the summer. My kids are there." And so she said, "Can we meet in New York? I want you to meet my husband and I want you to meet," she was in her mid 20s now. "I want you to meet my new baby." And we made a plan. We met on the Upper West Side at a kosher restaurant, and they came all dressed up with all kinds of gifts. And we had a nice meal together. And it was just so special. And that's why I don't have burnout. What can I say?
I mean, yeah, that's amazing. I think loving what you do and having the balance and is
Now,
really everything.
don't get me wrong. I'm a surgeon. I did a very difficult tumor today with my fellow that was eroding the skull base. Very unusual case. I love being in the OR. I love the cases that I love to do. And I love being a neurosurgeon. I mean, it's my happy place. But I think you're getting a sense of like, it's more than that. It's more than just the technical.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about, because I think as neurosurgeons, we all struggle with this, the times when things don't go so well,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm sure for you is extremely rare, but it happens to all of us.
Yeah.
And, when you have a complication, especially, with a child, which is something that, was, I had young children during training, that was just too much for me. How do you handle that mentally, and how do you prevent that from burning you out? And what tools have you developed over your career to deal with things like that?
Yeah, so I think it's all related to the things that we were talking about, having that support system, having that sense of, being part of a larger system, being part of a larger time frame, and also how you deal with people. So the hardest times I have are when I'm operating on somebody and there's a complication when I've never met them before. I'm on call, it's the middle of the night, and I'm doing something. And because I haven't had a chance to establish that level of relationship that I like to do. And yeah, it's difficult in that situation if, God forbid, you have a complication. But I think building that trust before surgery, and I saw this with some of my best mentors. We saw it at NYU, who are really good at this. You really establish that sense of connection before the surgery. And, once again, I hear it from the families. I'll never forget, there was, once again, another Jewish patient who was dying of a bad tumor. And the father, who was a wise man, saw that I was upset with the complicated course this child was having. And he said, don't be discouraged. You were chosen to do this job, and this is what you're here on earth to do. And, it's going to be fine. And I think it's about keeping perspective. Look, we all have these days where it just seems very dark, but we know that, light will have the last word. I think that in the end, we'll be okay. But I think it's really that relationship with the family. I mean, I've had multiple occasions like that. I mentioned one of my first tuberous sclerosis patients who had a bad complication, and the family was my biggest advocate. And I had a similar story here in Houston. I operated on this big tumor on a strapping young teenager, and they were local. And sometime after the surgery, maybe 6 weeks after the surgery, I was walking with my wife in the neighborhood. We like to walk our two French bulldogs, and we get a lot of joy out of that. They're wonderful family members. I'll just say that when our kids come back to Houston to visit, when they do visit us in Houston, Barbara and I are careful to take the pictures of the bulldogs down and put the pictures of the children up. So the bulldogs are our family now. But anyway, we're walking the bulldogs, and a car pulls up, and it's one of my neighbors who happens to be a builder, and he knows the father of this teenager that I operated on with the brain tumor. And he rolls down the window. He says, "By the way, I just saw so-and-so, and they love you. They were singing your praises, and they couldn't say enough about you," and blah, blah, blah. And then he drives away. And what he didn't know was that this kid came back with a bad complication, a bad infection. We had to take him back to the OR and do a washout. And anyway, so, it's how you deal with people, and making them feel like it's very hard as a surgeon. You want to avoid that patient. It's very hard to go there every day and round and give them a sense of hope. It takes a lot of work, but the more you give, the more you get. You put more into that relationship, you'll get it back. I think, when patients sense that you're dismissive, or you're talking down to them, or you're lecturing to them, that's when trouble starts.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's very helpful in terms of managing the mental toll with the patients. I'm wondering how you manage, what's going on in your head. Like, when I have a complication, I also tend to be, the relationship with the patient part is challenging, but it's not nearly as challenging as the relationship with my mind and the storm that's going on in there. Do you have any kind of advice about how you deal with that?
I mean, I think, use all your tools and facilities that work for you. I think that, I lose sleep. I'm the same way. We're all like that. All of us who are OCD in our own way, and very results oriented and driven. And I don't sleep. If I have a bad complication, it's the focus of my mind. And, sometimes it happens when you're out of town. Like, a patient will come back with a problem, and that's really hard because I have a total sense of lack of control, and that's really stressful. At least, when I'm there, I have a sense that I can make things better. But if I'm not there, and that's part of life, that happens. Unfortunately, I have great partners. I have the best partners here at Texas Children's, but I would say that I'm not immune to that. And I think that having a great partner, having my wife, having, my friends and my kids, and just time, and being able to talk about it, and not like let it build up. My partners are great. And I think having that safe environment that we talked about, that environment of trust, where we can talk about our, complicated patients, I think makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I agree. That sense of safety from your community, and also that you're not going to get, criticized by, your colleagues and all that, because that all just adds on and makes things, a million times worse.
100%.
Well, I wanted to just close, kind of with this question in terms of, we've talked about leading a meaningful, balanced life. And, has that evolved for you? I mean, what does that look like now, with some experience and perspective compared to maybe when you were training or just starting out?
Yeah. So thank you. And this has been such a joy to talk to you. I hope we get a chance to hang out more in the future.
Likewise. Yeah.
I
Thank
think
you.
that, yeah, I mean, I feel really blessed now. I'm sort of at this period in my life where I sort of understand why I'm here on Earth, and for some reason, like it's sort of catching a bit, like what matters to me, myself, like it seems to be a positive influence to some people, which was never my intention, but I think is a really nice thing because it brings me a lot of joy. But I think that at this stage of my life, as an empty nester, as a new grandparent, thank God healthy, I think that with some perspective in terms of my career as a neurosurgeon, I think that I really want to focus on family and friends. I think um, I do enjoy the things that I enjoy. So today I got up at 4 o'clock. I went running. I go to synagogue. I learned a page of Talmud, and I really know what I enjoy. So for everybody, I think it's important to know yourself, to try to understand. I joke that I asked Barbara, who's much smarter than me, like, what's your why? And she's like, you can contemplate these silly questions. Don't bother me with this. I don't have a why. But for me, I'm always interested in trying to find meaning, trying to grow, trying to elevate myself. Because I think that if I didn't, I would just, it would be the same old, which would be very boring and very sad. So I'm always trying to challenge myself. My wife jokes, can't you just go out for a run? Why do you have to like run a marathon or a half marathon? Can't you just be? I said, we're neurosurgeons. We can't just have simple goals, And
I was going to say, that sounds familiar.
you're right. Like you're the ultimate in this field. So I feel almost embarrassed speaking to you about this, but I feel
No.
that I recognize now sort of the fragility of life and sort of the limited time we have on this earth, and I try to appreciate every minute, even though it sounds cliche. I really do, and I try to really lean into the things that matter to me and that I think will bring fulfillment to the world and to myself. So, like I said, all the things that we talked about. But I think, like I said, when I turned 50, things sort of changed for me, and I kind of relaxed a little, and I said, I'm not this person, I'm not that person, I'm this person, and this is what makes me tick, and this is what I'm here to do. And so, thank God I have a partner and friends who celebrate who I am and allow me to be myself, and I feel very blessed. But it's not over, and there's more to achieve, and there's new doors to open, and I don't know what tomorrow will bring. So I'm always open for a challenge, and that's what life is all about. It's all about growing. If you're not going up, you're going down.
Yeah. I love all of that. And, sometimes the cliches, when you really, really live them and take them to heart, that actually just makes all the difference in the world. And you've certainly had a huge impact on so many people, myself included.
That's very kind of
So
you.
I want to thank you personally for that. And thank you as well for taking so much time today to talk to me and to talk to us. It's really been a pleasure.
Such a joy. And, once again, I mean it. I would love to connect again in person, and that we have so much to talk about.
Yeah, this has been great. I feel like we could go on for 2 more hours.
Thank you so much, Andrew. This is wonderful.
Yes, thank you, Howard.